What is up, YouTube? My name is Paige, and welcome back to my motorcycle. Welcome back to my booktube channel. Today, I am taking a little break from some work. I needed a few minutes. This may take a little bit longer than a few minutes, but I am finally getting to a video that I've been working on for the past few months, and that is ranking the memoirs that I've been listening to. So I listened to 11. I meant to listen to 10, but I listened to 11 memoirs, and I'm going to be going through them in the order that I listened to them in and ranking them from 11 to 1. Ones that I would least recommend to the ones that I would most recommend. And I'll give you my reasons why. I'll give you thorough reviews of all the memoirs. Now, I want to keep in mind that on Goodreads, I did not rate all the memoirs. Some of them I just didn't think it was appropriate to rate them. If I rated it 5 stars, I gave it the 5-star rating. And if I absolutely thought it was not worth the read, I did give it like a low star rating. But for many of them, I didn't rate them at all. Half of them were ghostwritten, half of them were not, which also is kind of interesting. We can talk about that a little bit, but there's so many videos out there that talk about ghostwriting, and that's not what this video is going to be about. All the memoirs that I listened to were narrated by the subject of the memoirs, which was kind of the point of this video. I haven't been really into audiobooks at all, and I wanted to give them a shot. And I thought that memoirs would be a good way to get into them, because the whole point of a memoir being narrated by the person who is the subject of the memoir is that it's even more personal. And I think that was really worth the experiment and actually got me into audiobooks the way I hoped it would. I did DNF 1 audiobook. And I think that's how I miscounted and listened to 11 instead of 10. And it was actually kind of a positive DNF. I DNF'd listening to Leslie Jones's memoir, but I did that because it was so funny. Obviously, she is a writer. That is her craft. She's a comedian, she's a writer. However, the audiobook version of the memoir was not what I was expecting. There's a lot of ad-libbing and kind of tangents that aren't in the actual memoir itself. So the audio version of it is really, really long and full of extra exposition and really interesting anecdotes and stuff, but that's not what I was looking for this specific video. And honestly, I don't think I'd want to listen to the rest of it. I really want to read her memoir. It was super interesting, and I think it's worth the read, but I'd like to read it in a physical form. If I were to rate the half of the memoir that I did listen to in audiobook form, I'd probably give it 4 stars. So like I said, I didn't actually give a lot of these memoirs ratings, so instead I'm going to be ranking them here. And those rankings are going to be completely subjective, but I will give you my reasonings behind my rankings, and I'll just be going through them one at a time, starting with the first book that I listened to, which was Paris, a memoir by Paris Hilton, and her ghostwriter, Joni Rogers, who she does acknowledge in the acknowledgements. But through listening to this book, it sounds very much like it was written mostly by Paris Hilton. Based on some articles that I've seen online, it seems like she wrote the majority of the first draft on her own, and then Joni Rogers really helped her find that, I don't want to say that, more acceptable voice or more professional memoir voice. I don't think I've actually shown you this. This is how I do all of my reviews. Even if I don't write them on Goodreads, this is my process. I write a little book report on all the books that I read, and I write them out by hand. So this book I read in March. So I knew very little about Paris Hilton going into this memoir. I was just at the right age to succumb to that facade that was put on by the show The Simple Life with Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie. That's hot, and Von Dutch is what came to mind when I thought about Paris Hilton as this pinnacle of American wealth and kind of nepotism. But since listening to this audiobook, my mind has been blown just a little bit. And I feel like that's true of a lot of kind of expose style memoirs. As much as fame and wealth are a central part of the narrative of Paris Hilton's story and of this memoir, so too are like genuine trauma and grief and resilience. So Paris Hilton says very bluntly and clearly that she doesn't take her status very seriously or her public self very seriously, other than how it reflects on her efforts to change legislation and on, of course, on her brand and like the platform that her brand allows her to have. Now, I looked into this because I was genuinely curious, and she really does use her platform to perform activism against child abuse and to support change in legislation in the United States around the foster care system and what is referred to as the troubled teen industry. I genuinely like wanted to hug her and like cheer for her and get to know her personally by the end of this book, which is totally the point. Like any memoir, this is for publicity, but I don't think it is done with any malice. And I think that she's coming from a genuine place of hurt and hope that her experience can positively impact next generations. So this book is structured in a way that seems like natural or like accidental, but it's definitely purposely built as like a non-chronology. She begins the book by discussing her adult diagnosis of ADHD and kind of frames the whole book around how not having been diagnosed earlier with ADHD has impacted how she remembers and how she tells her story. So she uses landmarks in pop culture, like songs, movies, and specific like pop culture events to recall the time that each event in her life happens. So these provide checkpoints for the reader that act as like kind of like little sprinkles of nostalgia that afford kind of like a break from all the discussion of like essay, teenage angst, and physical and emotional torture, as well as like media blasphemy that is discussed through this entire book. Paris Hilton was sent to a string of reformatory schools where she was like ritualistically abused, like in a cultish almost manner. She was also forced to abuse other children while she was in these institutions, and that, along with her ability and patience to like reframe the discourse around her sex tape as the socially accepted and encouraged exploitation of an unconsenting young woman, are reasons enough to read this book, in my opinion. Of course, this memoir is not entirely perfect. Paris Hilton does not paint herself in any way in a perfect light. So no character, I know the real people, but no character in this story is entirely fleshed out other than Paris herself. So it just feels kind of like name-droppy most of the way through, although that is very likely intentional. If you want a book where the narrator talks to you as a friend, or even more so as a confidant, read this book. Or better yet, you'll listen to it. Paris Hilton would give you the sense of complete disconnect from like ordinary person reality, driving $500,000 cars with Kim and Britt in tow, and in the same breath say some of the most profound things that you might read this year. And that might be The Ghost Rider. But I liked this book, and you'll see where it lands in the rankings as we go through the rest. So the next book that I read was Pageboy by Elliot Pagee. I didn't think I had a lot to say about this book, but now looking back at my notes, I wrote 2 pages. So, no, I wrote 3 pages, so I guess I did have a lot to say. So yes, it was thought-provoking, and I thought it was a really important account to listen to about Elliot Page's experience as a very public but painfully closeted young person. His recount of his transition is careful and sad and touching and at many times frustrating. He talks about how people's words and actions entirely hindered his transition into his 30s, and how growing up where he did in the time that he did made it so that even though he was able to transition at some point in his life, it could have come much sooner for him. This is a perspective that I haven't read much of, and I'm sure many people haven't, because this perspective is emerging. That of an open trans person with a very high profile career who has the means to talk about their transition in a format that's going to be listened to. In many ways, this book was exactly what I expected, if a little less name-droppy than I had anticipated in the first place, or selfishly would have hoped. However, I understand completely why it isn't. I give the content of this book a really high rating in general. Elliot Pagee does a really good job of right off the bat saying that he does not see himself as an educator or as the poster child or a representative of the queer community as a whole, and that he hopes that people are not looking to this book for educational purposes. And he makes it very clear that this story is his experience, not the experience of being a trans person. However, there were things about just like the writing of this book that like pulled me right out and made me quite confused. Could I follow the absolutely nonsensical timeline? Absolutely not. And there are many memoirs on this list that do not follow a chronology. This one was just so hard to follow. He was jumping around so much that like I had a hard time figuring out how old he was or what had already happened, what experiences had already taken place. I understand that he was trying to create a very interesting narrative with kind of like literary pacing. Like the prose were often very beautiful, but I found myself getting annoyed. If you like Elliot Pagee, you will like this book. He places himself very much in like the heroic protagonist role and places around himself villains and saboteurs and sidekicks and saviors, and it kind of rolls out like a novel. Granted, growing up in a very homophobic environment and a very homophobic Hollywood, I don't want to invalidate his experience at all by saying that I didn't like the way he told his story. I just wish that he had explained more why some people held such a negative place in his psyche. I think he was too kind. These people held such a place that he put them in his memoir, but didn't explain how they wronged him. And I don't think that was because, you know, they'd done something small and it doesn't matter how small the action was, it just like it left him feeling unsupported. I don't think that was the case at all. I genuinely think he was being too nice. I think these people were so horrible to him that he put them in his memoir and then removed or like redacted some information that would have given us a little bit more context. Because some of the anecdotes fell really flat and didn't really make any sense. So there must have been more there that was removed or edited out in some way. Also, this did not impact my rating at all, but if you're looking for name drops for people who are homophobic or transphobic in Hollywood, this is not the book that you'll find it in. Just something to consider. He's also very careful about keeping those stories ambiguous, so you would not know necessarily even when they happened. Now, I listened to this audiobook a little while ago, so it might have changed at this point, but there were several instances, I think at least 5, where like the same line was repeated multiple times, like the editing was really choppy. So hopefully it's changed at this point, but if you're the type of person who really is irked by the editing of audiobooks, this book was like, whoa, like what's going on? I would recommend this book, and I put it just below Paris Hilton on my ranking. Also worth noting that Elliot Pagee did not use a ghostwriter to write his book, completely written on his own, and I think the writing was like really good considering. I mean, he's a writer, but like he wrote a good book. The next book I read was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. And I know this is on so many lists of memoirs and so many videos, but I couldn't not include it. This is like people's like top tier rated memoir from a famous person, actor, singer, whatever. So I had to listen to it to kind of give myself a baseline. So, and this is the only memoir I heard anything about before I read it, and those were only glowing reviews, so I was able to kind of be critical, but there wasn't a lot to be critical about. I thoroughly enjoyed how Jennette McCurdy told her story, and unfortunately, her story of trauma as a child star is not uncommon, And we've seen that recently with the release of the Nickelodeon documentary that just came out. This is the story of Jenna McCurdy's childhood growing up Mormon, and then her transition into child stardom, becoming an actor, a path she never wanted for herself, but that she felt thrust into by her mother. Jenna McCurdy tells us about her toxic relationship with her mother, and she talks about it in the form of a narrative that is through the lens with the perspective of her past self, living those memories in the moment. After listening to this audiobook, I wanted to see what the 1-star reviews were about, and most of them just had to do with the fact that some people just didn't jive with that style of narration. I personally thought it added some extra layers and allowed us to sympathize more with Jenna McCurdy. One of the 1-star reviews that I read was about how the reader didn't think that it was funny at all, but it is funny. It is like, there are some funny lines. Jenna McCurdy is like a funny person. However, this book is dark, and I can understand how some people find it hard to find light in a story that is very much about abuse in many forms. Another great thing about this book is that she discusses therapy and her struggle with accepting therapy as a means to process what happened in her life. If you liked iCarly, if you're a Jenna McCurdy fan, read this book. It's fantastic. And honestly, listen to it. If you watch iCarly, maybe watch a little bit of iCarly, see if you like her voice in the first place. But I loved her tone throughout this book, and it kind of gave me a better sense of how she wanted this book to be read. And I think that was really important for this story. I placed this above Paris Hilton on my ranking, and that was book number 3. The next book that I read was We Were Dreamers by Simu. This is a young person's memoir again, and I didn't even know it was a book until I started this video. It was very short. I listened to it while I was cleaning the house one day, and I listened to the entire book in one listen. So if you're looking for something short, if you're a fan of the Marvel Universe, it has a longer title than We Were Dreamers. It's We Were Dreamers, an Immigrant, Superheroes, something. So this is the story of Simu's childhood and his life into adulthood when he becomes a super famous movie actor. He encourages the reader to skip forward a few chapters if they don't want to listen to his formative years, but I implore you to not skip those chapters. He discusses his young childhood living with his grandparents in China while his parents find their footing in Canada, and his subsequent removal and the trauma that comes along with that is very formative and definitely worth the read, especially as it ties into his life as an immigrant and as a young person who becomes very assimilated into Canadian culture very quickly and has to balance his want to fit in with his very unstructured home life with immigrant parents who are also trying to develop this sense of Canadianness themselves. This book was very sweetly written. It is not ghost written at all. Simu wrote this himself and is very proud of that, and he should be. It's a very good book. But he does not shy away from topics such as abuse and racism, which I'm very glad he didn't. He tackles those in a very interesting way that was very unlike any of the other memoirs that I read. He talks about how he has his parents review some of the anecdotes and some of the harder stories that he has to tell in this memoir, and how it was a growing experience for all of them. I was partial to the section about his university days because I was surprised to hear that we went to Western at the same time. Like, he talks about the cheers that we did. We never lived in the same residence, but I knew them. I knew them as he was saying them, and I just thought that was kind of funny. So that campus talk was nostalgic for me. I would have ranked this much higher, but I think that Simu is like way too hard on himself. He doesn't paint himself in a rosy light at all. He talks about his life as though it's like a set of facts. Like, he made bad choices. I should have done this. This is the route that I chose for myself. And I feel like he needed a hug and to be told that he could talk about how he saw himself at those times, or how he sees himself now, because he was so hard on himself in this book. And instead he gave us kind of like the immigrant parent lens. So it would have been nice to know what he thought. What did you think of yourself, Simu Liu? What did you think? So I would recommend this book, especially if you like Simu Liu, or if you went to Western. If you went to Western, you'll like this book. I don't know, it was fun. And sad. So yeah, it was definitely worth the read. Good listen. He has a great voice. So that was another plus. And I rated this just slightly below Elliot Pagee. Next up was another heavy hitter I listened to, The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. This is another ghostwritten book, but it was hard to figure out who ghost wrote it with her. Ghost wrote? That sounds right. I couldn't quite tell. The sources were shady, if it was Sam Lansky or Luke Dempsey, but nevertheless, it was a ghostwritten book, and I think perhaps by both of them. If you lived through the 2000 and early 2010s and you wanted to ask Britney what is going through your mind and are you okay, she answers both of those questions. The first in great detail, and the second to say, no, I was not okay, and here is who to blame. Of course, this is actually quite similar to Paris Hilton's because they were friends, they grew up at the same time, and really could be read as a companion memoir to Paris Hilton's memoir, but they did live different lives. She also, contrary to Paris's memoir, does name drop a lot. And Paris did not paint herself in that flattering a light at all, whereas Britney Spears really uses this as a platform to tell her side, put everybody else down. I'm sure it was a very therapeutic experience writing this memoir. I understand that this is an important platform for her, especially considering the legal aspects of her story. But having read those two memoirs back to back, it was hard not to notice how little reflection Britney Spears seems to have done about her own actions as she speaks about it in this book. I imagine I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt that she has done more reflection, but it definitely stands in stark contrast to Paris Hilton's story. She is undoubtedly a victim of the conservatorship she was forced into. I think she missed the mark in this memoir, addressing some of the behaviors that were outside of the conservatorship and not looking at it through the lens of healing that she discusses being so focused on. I think if you picked up this book with only good intentions, like myself, you'd be disappointed. I didn't need Britney Spears to sell herself as perfect or a great mother or a good friend or a reasonable person, but she really does a lot of that, and she does a lot of work in this writing to make herself seem blameless. But honestly, I don't think a lot of people who are reading this book are blaming her for anything. If you're reading this book, you're looking for her side of the story, not for her to give you reasons to like her. You probably already like her in the first place. This book was written by a person who is still suffering, and I only wish Britney Spears the best. And I hope that she continues to grow and that she's able to accept the fact that when we reflect critically on our decisions and on our own pasts, that's not a blame game. That's how we grow. I didn't feel that I could rate this book. I did place it among my rankings, just below Simu Liu, and for similar reasons to ranking his lower, the reflective piece. But I would recommend this book to anyone who is willing to give Britney Spears grace. It is a well-written book. There's a lot of great metaphors, and there's song lyrics inserted. It's not clunky at all. So that was really nice, and like kind of a little bit of nostalgia. The next memoir I listened to was a bit of a break from the series, and it was Patrick Stewart's memoir, Making It So. Patrick Stewart, the famous stage-to-screen actor who recounts his 80-some years of life in this sometimes mundane but often action-packed set of anecdotes. I say action-packed, but they were more dramatic than anything. And he is a dramatic man. He is a and I've said this a couple times, but he has like the voice for for an audiobook. I listened to it at 2x speed, as I do with most, but some books I was able to listen to at like 1.5, 1.7. His is a 2x speed book. He speaks slowly. He is old. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I didn't know very much about Patrick Stewart at all. He hasn't experienced any great tragedy or come against any insurmountable odds. So it was just like kind of like a name-droppy, fun listen. For the most part, there's a chunk in the middle where he cheats on his wife and you're like, Patrick Stewart, you. But otherwise, it was just a long, pleasant listen. And I mean long. It's a long one. He seems like a really nice old guy with some really liberal views who spent his whole life learning. I don't have a whole lot else to say about it other than it's a nice chill listen that could keep you company on your commute for a week. If you like Star Trek, oof, listen. If you like British theater, oof, listen. If you like Shakespeare, oh man. If you like all three of those, like, get a room, because this book is for you. And it's only because all the other books were so good, and this was just like, it just kind of fell flat a lot for me, and it was just kind of chill and cool and whatever. It could have landed anywhere on this list, but it so far, of all these books, lands at the bottom. But there are others. Now, I'm going to skip the next one that I read, because I'm going to save it till the very end. The next book that I read was the worst book of the year so far. I hated it. It does not even land on the same list as the rest of these memoirs. So I will reveal that at the very end. But I read it right after the Patrick Stewart one. The next memoir that I read was, and thank goodness I read this one next, because I almost gave up. No, I didn't. But was Viola Davis's memoir, Finding Me. This is on a lot of people's lists of one of the best celebrity memoirs, and I completely agree. I don't have a lot to say about this because I don't want to say too much. I think everybody should listen to this memoir. You could read it, I'm sure, but listening to it was definitely very impactful. Viola Davis has lived a life. She talks about her childhood a lot. She talks about her parents. She's a very forgiving person. She talks about how she makes her way into the arts and acting. This book felt very honest, and listening to these stories in her voice was as compelling as you'd expect it to be. This book comes with as many trigger warnings as exist. If you're looking for a story that is very much the opposite of Patrick Stewart's story, like a long fought journey to Hollywood, this is for you. If you're looking for snapshots of life-altering choices followed by honest reflection, this is for you. Fan or not, like, I love Viola Davis, but I knew nothing about her. This book will captivate you, and you are lucky to hear Viola Davis tell her story in her voice. She also won a Grammy. She EGOT'd for this book. And it lands right at the top of the books that I read so far. Next up, and third from the last, I read The House of Hidden Meetings by RuPaul. And RuPaul wrote this with the help of a ghostwriter, an unknown ghostwriter. I could find no information about this person. If you ever watched Drag Race, like any episode of Drag Race, and you thought to yourself, how did he achieve such icon status in a realm that seems only occupied at that level by him, or some sensical version of that question? He answers that question and so much more in this book. Like, did he invent the idea of being a drag superstar? What went into creating such a stratospheric persona and empire? This book at its core answers those questions and so many more that I didn't even know that I had. After the memoir that shall not be named, I was not sure what to expect at all, and I was kind of nervous. Genuinely, I was worried that RuPaul would change my mind about him, because I do like RuPaul. I had watched the Jack Edwards video about RuPaul, and was a little concerned that he was going to be just very unapologetic about his whole bookstore fiasco. If you're interested in learning that side of RuPaul's past few years, I'll link the Jack Edwards video in the description below. But he focuses a lot on just like his self-reflection and just what you would expect from a memoir and exactly what you want. This memoir was meticulous in like the most haphazard, endearing way. There were so many feelings that were discussed. Like, he really goes into how he felt in all the different points in his life. Every story that he tells, he answers all the questions that you have about that story. He leaves no stone unturned. He talks about his opinions of people, whether good or bad, people's opinions of him, and he's really just not apologetic, which is kind of great. The entire book read in such a satisfying way. That being said, it was kind of hard to tell because he does both. whether he was reflecting on the past at times or if he was retelling the scenario with his perception of it at the time. Could have been a little bit more focused, but I was sad when it was over. This is a tie. It could go either way. I ranked RuPaul right next to Paris Hilton. Those were both very good memoirs, and I couldn't really place one above the other. I think now maybe I would place RuPaul above. No, see, there's still a tie. I can't decide. They tied. Next is another memoir that I read all in one listen while doing some yard work. It was a lot of yard work, but it was yard work nonetheless, was Mindy Kaling's Why Not Me? In this book, Mindy Kaling tells us why people think she's funny and cute and annoying all at once. And she shows us that too. No, honestly, she tells us how she got into writing and acting and then producing while battling against imposter syndrome. And the overwhelming sense that she didn't have the right body, personality, look, style, or talent to click with the people in the circles that she wanted to frequent. So pretty relatable, considering it's a Hollywood memoir, or a New York memoir. Showbiz memoir. The whole book was good, it was pretty okay. My absolute favorite part was this invented email thread in an alternate reality where she becomes an English teacher instead of getting into showbiz. Like the rest of the book, it wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it was absolutely endearing. Trigger/content warning, there is a lot of discussion of fat phobia and negative body image, but it genuinely seems to come from a place of honesty and self-reflection. So that's what we look for in a memoir. It wasn't great. I ranked it below all of these other memoirs on the list, but it still didn't hit the bottom. It's very readable. If you like Mindy Kaling, you'll like this. Lastly, I read Gabrielle Union's Got Anything Stronger? Apparently this is like the lesser of her two memoirs that are out so far, but I didn't hate it. I don't have a whole lot to say about this book. But I still liked it. It was a discussion of what motherhood is like in many forms. Gabrielle Union, along with her ghostwriter Kevin Carr O'Leary, they tackle very specifically race, transphobia, and trans allyship throughout this entire book. It's all centered around motherhood as an act of feminism, and I thought it was like a really interesting lens to see what Hollywood and what TV and filmmaking is like as a mother who is actively trying to be a mother first. And by the end, I was like, man, you should adopt me. It left me feeling glad that there are such good, self-aware female celebrities who are willing to put themselves out there as role models. This one goes between Britney Spears and Patrick Stewart. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. And finally, we are on to the very last and least memoir. John Stamos, If You Would Have Told Me, ghostwritten with Daphne Young. Ooh, I am very grateful to RuPaul and Viola Davis for following this one, because otherwise, oh my gosh. I listen to these for the majority of the time at the gym, like during my workouts, and I definitely just stopped and stared into space with a disgusted look on my face many times while listening to this book. I was so disappointed. So I went into this without any opinion on John Stamos as a person, as an actor, anything. But I came out of it feeling like I'd slogged through it, and my perception of John Stamos is that he is an out-of-touch narcissist. He is very cavalier about discussing drinking and driving, and about drinking and driving in general, and has some seriously out-of-date and completely out-of-touch opinions of how transphobia, racism, ableism in comedy frame people's perspectives of the stigmas and struggles, etc. around those things. Now, I understand that that could just make me come off as like a downer and like, but whatever. The way he talks about it, he's not funny. And regardless of whether you're funny or not, being racist isn't funny, being ableist isn't funny, being transphobic and homophobic isn't funny, but like, there's no redemption. He's not like redeemably funny. Like, setting aside even my difference in opinion with him, the book is so poorly paced that I had such a hard time staying invested. I can read a book with unlikable characters. I can read a memoir of somebody I don't agree with just to see what their perspective is. But, oh, no. This is boring. Like, I guess John Stamos and his ghostwriter, like, gave word count based on the importance that people had to John Stamos and in his life. But, like, there was so much Don Rickles and Beach Boys. It was like half of the book. I came here for John Stamos, not for Don Rickles. And like, again, it was one of those books where I didn't learn anything about how he felt during different situations in his life, what he thought about his behaviors. And it was all about how other people perceived him. And like, how do you even know that? This is not a memoir. This is like a complain book. It was so weird. Like, it was just like, he didn't need to write this. This is not, don't, please stop. I read part of an interview with him where he said, people just kept asking me to write this memoir, kept asking me to write this memoir until finally I did. And I was like, bro, why did you give in? I guess he probably made a lot of money. All right, so those were all the celebrity memoirs, my not so definitive rankings of them that I read in March, April, May, and June. 4 months of memoirs, 11 memoirs in total. Thank you so much for sticking around this far. I appreciate you wholeheartedly. I hope you're enjoying my reading journey so far. Come back if you please, like, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!